Welcome to Post.Games, a podcast about why and how we love video games. I am your host, Chris Plant, and I am so happy to have you here. The first Velvet Underground album only sold 10,000 copies, but everyone who bought it formed a band. It's an iconic quote, typically attributed to Brian Eno, about the band that inspired countless others, including David Bowie, Joy Division, Patti Smith, and Sonic Youth. I don't know how many people listened to A Life Well Wasted, the podcast we'll be talking about today, when it premiered in 2009. But it has inspired hundreds of video game podcasts in the years that followed, including this one, which borrows liberally from its format, albeit without the elaborate audio mixing and scale. But hey, look, it's a weekly show made by one person, so give me a break here. Anyway, A Life Well Wasted was the original What If NPR Made a Video Game podcast. Founded after the closure of the beloved electronic gaming monthly magazine, then full-time games journalist and part-time musician Robert Ashley decided to merge his knack for storytelling and his talent for audio into one holistic experience, available in the early days of podcast, back when people still associated pod with the iPod. Between January and November of 2009, Ashley published 5 episodes and 2 B-sides, introducing listeners to the world of video game archivists, a, quote, sustainable game designer who lived with his family on a $14,000 yearly budget, and, as Ashley wrote, a, quote, struggling game blogger who happens to possess freakishly large genitalia. Over the following years, Ashley's pace slowed once a year, then a couple a decade. Ashley recently released the 9th episode of A Life Well Wasted, the first in nearly 3 years, the second since 2013. Needless to say, the episode is great, and you should go listen to it. But there's a story around the episode, too. What drives a storyteller to keep the rarest game podcast alive? What is the difference between podcast and radio? And will we get more of this show in a year, or 3, or 10? Or is this the end of A Life Well Wasted? This week on Post.Games, the rarest video game podcast returns. Act 1, the story of a video game studio in 2025. Act 2, behind the scenes of A Life Well Wasted. The Patreon bonus, a very normal chat about games and perverts with Robert Ashley. And Act 3, the news of the week. Let's get right to it. It is a new year and you want to eat better, but you still have no time to work with. You have no energy. You have so much going on in your life. Oh, what do? You do Factor. 2 minutes, real food, and you are done. You're not failing at eating healthy. You're failing at having 3 extra hours in every night. You're failing at not being a chef and wanting to do cleanup. Factor takes care of that. It has delicious food that is good for you. You got lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole food ingredients, and none of the yucky stuff, no refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners. It will offer you whatever you need to match your lifestyle. For me, Mediterranean diet, it really works well. But maybe you need something else, like a high-protein diet or GLP-1 support or ready-to-eat salads. Whatever it is, Factor wants to meet you on your page. Always fresh, never frozen, and like I said, ready in 2 minutes with no prep, no cleanup, just chill. I use Factor. I think that you should too. Head to factormeals.com/postgames, 50 off, and use code postgames50 off to get 50% off your first Factor box, plus free breakfast for a year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscriptions purchase. Make healthier eating easy with Factor. 1, the story of a video game studio in 2025. Robert Ashley is a musician, storyteller, podcast producer, and journalist, sometimes all at once. He has recorded albums with his band, I Come to Shanghai, produced some of the most memorable stories, audio or otherwise, on video game culture, and, well, I won't spoil the rest, but I will say this opening act digs specifically into his latest episode, which is about a real, though unnamed, studio that released a massive AAA video game. And then, less than a month after release, that game got shut down, and later the studio closed. We will talk about how and why Ashley felt this was a story, after years, that needed to be told. And we'll talk about so much more. Can you give listeners an elevator pitch for the latest episode of A Life Well Wasted?
Yeah. Whoosh. Man, you know what's funny is I was like writing the description of it for my web guy and struggling with whether or not I will talk about it in these terms. I can read you what I have right now. So it says, Robert Ashley talks to 11 people who worked on what might be the biggest flop in video game history about what it was like to spend years making something that no longer exists.
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on, having listened to it. I think you did a good job.
Yeah. So, I mean, the other thing, I guess obviously what I'm struggling with is I'm not sure how much to key into what the actual game was, because you've listened to it and I figure we'll talk about this, but we don't really go into it in the story, and for a couple of reasons.
Let's go into that right now. You make a very unusual and creative decision that I really appreciated, which is you never say the name of the developer or the game, despite it being, I think you're right, maybe the biggest flop in the history of video games. Why did you make that choice?
For a couple of reasons. I mean, the first one was this is a game that already had this like huge online life that I wanted absolutely nothing to do with. And I don't care if like anybody who obsessively talked about this game online like ever listens to this. I just didn't want anything to do with it. It was a weird, gross world that I didn't want to interact with. And because my show is really about, it's human interest stories. It's about people and not about the gaming news or about the video game industry. And I felt like it gets in the way when there's such a big story in that world of just getting to know like the people involved. I wanted listeners to mainly just get to know these people and their situation. And then there's also just the looming possibility of NDAs and all of that, which I would like to avoid anybody like getting any shit from. There's nothing in the show that warrants any kind of NDA thing. But I just wanted to be super like, you know what? We won't even say the name.
It was a bit of an editorial pump fake for me in a really nice way. When you chose not to say the name of the studio or the developer, I assumed, oh, I get it. It's a universal story. This isn't about this studio. It's about the game industry. And like, to some degree it is, but I don't actually know if that is your core interest. I feel like your core interest is these very specific people who are impacted by a very specific thing.
Yeah, and some of that might come from the fact that one of the people who was involved in making this game was a previous story subject on A Life Well Wasted and had become a friend of mine. I sort of already knew somebody there, and I used to work for video game magazines and stuff. I gotta confess, I don't really care about the video game industry. I don't care about the business. I care about the art. I care about the people. But I have no interest in hearing how many copies of such and such sold or whatever some CEO of whatever company has. I don't care. I really don't. And so, yeah, it's just a human story. And I think it also relates to the way that people work now and the kinds of work that people do, even outside of the video game business. My web guy, I have this friend of mine, Willis, he makes software. He listened to the show, and there's a lot of conversation about how strange it is that these people spent years making something that's completely gone and you cannot touch it. You can't experience it in any way. It disappeared. And his reaction was man, that's everything I ever make. I never even thought to be sad about it. But I think that's fucking crazy. It's a creative job, and to be building and working on something and then, oh, it's gone forever. I have no idea. Like it just gets memory hold. I can't fathom that. And we're increasingly creating this digital world that we live in. And I'm just like, hey, we may consider that these things don't last.
I'm going to hang a lantern on this and come back to it because
Okay.
I have some questions here. But first, you flew to Seattle to report this story in person. Mm-hmm. It's been years since the last episode of A Life Well Wasted. What excited you about this so much that you said, this is the next episode, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to travel to tell it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was aware since a friend of mine was working on it that this game was having trouble, and I knew that people were talking about it online or whatever. When it went offline and I realized like, oh wait, this thing, I didn't even get a chance to play it. I never mentioned this, but like, dude's a friend of mine. I never played the game. I only really knew about it after it got taken down, like everybody else. So I started thinking about that and it just attracted me. But I guess the other thing going on here is that in between the previous episode of this show and the current one, I wasn't like doing nothing. I've been working on a new series with a friend of mine that's like a commercial podcast, like a documentary podcast that's kind of like, it's been dragging out a while. And I started to get a little frustrated with the pace, and I was like, man, this is cool. I'm just like crank out another episode of A Life Well Wasted, which I consider like an ongoing project. It doesn't abide by any schedule, obviously, and never did. Even when you go back to the beginning, I would always be like, I'm going to put one up a month, every month. And then it would be like 3 months later, here's another one. I like the idea of it being this ongoing series that I just update whenever I find a good story for it and when I have time to crank one out. And it appealed to me. I wasn't even sure that I would get enough material from it for an entire episode, because normally I think of the show as kind of a magazine of multiple stories. There has been one episode in the past with a single story, but this is the only other time I've done that.
A thing that surprised me with this episode is it is about layoffs, but I felt it zigging where almost every other layoff story zagged. And I'm curious, as somebody who's consumed a fair amount of games media over the years and worked in it, were there pitfalls that you were actively trying to avoid when you were reporting this out?
The main pitfall to avoid when you make a podcast that gets updated like on a every 3 years or just whenever something happens basis is you can't make something that is too much like in the news. It has to have staying power. It has to be something that you can come back to and still enjoy it a couple of years from now. Because a lot of times people will stumble on this show a long time after. I will often get messages from people that'll be like, oh, I just found your show. It's so amazing. And they're like, oh, wait. Oh, no, this doesn't, it never updates. Like, yeah, welcome to my world. So a lot of it was me probably avoiding being too newsy and current and trying to make something a little more evergreen out of it, even though it's pretty newsy compared to what I normally go for.
The layoffs themselves and the stories around them are sadly familiar to the point that they can almost nauseatingly echo one another, and you can kind of almost glaze over them after you've read too many of these stories. Was there a moment when you were interviewing your subjects that really surprised you, that pulled you into the reality of, oh, this is a person and not just another one of these stories?
Yeah, when they're sitting right in front of you, that's already a given. But, we all face the prospect of losing a job in this country and being like totally screwed by that. But with the video game layoffs, it's kind of hard to put a face to it or like what the challenges of that might be. Because I recorded like 14 hours of interviews, there's a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor that I think might have spoken to that more. Like specifically, I'm thinking about there was a lead software engineer who'd been in the business for 20 years. And he was talking to me about his frustration in interviews, because interviewing when you're an engineer for these things, it involves all these like almost college level tests where they test your basic math skills and they make you sit there in front of a person and program code in front of them. And it's all this testing and stuff. And I mean, this guy's been doing this stuff for 20 years. He's got all this experience and, he's got kids, he's got a mortgage. It's very, very stressful to find a job in that kind of environment, especially when you can just tell they just want to find some younger guy who will commit even more of his time to the project and probably take less pay. Yeah, the engineers made me feel very anxious for them, the way that they talked about their prospects. Whereas the artists were very, very chill and like, we already got jobs, man. Don't worry about it. I don't know why that's easier for them, but yeah.
That is the rare time maybe in history where the artists are chill and the engineers are the stressed ones.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you like artists had to show up and take like an art test. I don't know if you grew up with those TV commercials for like getting into art school. It's like, can you draw this picture? And it's like a bad pencil drawing of a dog or something. But it's just very stressful to like perform for someone that you're looking for a job from.
Those aired right before the commercials that were like, Level 3, we need to add more fun. And you're like, man, I need to go to game design school. That sounds kick ass.
Yeah, no, there's a bit of that as well. Like talking about, you know, a lot of these people came from these game design schools. I worked for video game magazines back when those existed. And one of the first stories I ever wrote, I flew to Texas, to the University of Texas at Dallas, to talk to people there about one of the first game design programs that was around in like 2004, and that was such a new thing. And I was kind of shocked getting back into this environment and being like, oh, all these people are from these schools and they all went into debt to get these jobs, which are not easy jobs. They are jobs that require a lot of time and a lot of effort. So yeah, it's a tough business.
I guess there's a balance a journalist strikes between sharing a story that the subjects are telling and outright being an advocate for a very specific change. And I feel like there is more and more pressure around that spectrum now with where the world is. Where do you see yourself on that spectrum? Do you see yourself as an advocate, or do you feel like you are here just to tell a story?
I'd advocate whatever any of the people on that episode thought should happen in their business, because they were all very experienced, good people, hard workers, good at what they do. I'm open to advocating for whatever they think ought to be going on in game studios, because I don't know. I mean, I've been in game studios as a visitor, as a journalist. You get shown around, you see the figurines and the game collection, and you meet the ideas guy who tells you some crazy pitch or whatever. But to talk to just like the workers is very interesting. It's a difficult business. And yeah, I don't hesitate to advocate for anything. I don't even consider myself like very impartial, because like I said, I mean, I came to the story because basically it's a friend of mine working at this company. Like, I like these people. I as soon as I met all of these people, I was like, man, I like every single one of these people. They're really interesting. I used to sort of try to be more of a journalist back in the magazine days, and I got none of that anymore. I'm just like, let me meet people, let me represent them as I see and hear them, and communicate what they want to communicate, you know, assuming they're people that I find interesting and that I think they're being honest. Like, I'm not just going to pass along lies or whatever, but if people are giving me their honest take, I'm just like here to present it, you know?
You mentioned that you have 14 hours of interview audio with these people. What was the most painful piece of that you had to leave on the editing room floor?
Man, I have like the trauma child's like Swiss cheese brain, where whatever I'll forget everything immediately. So if it's something that I really like struggled with, it's already like I emptied the recycle bin of my mind a long time ago. But I mean, that story that I was just telling you about, there's a lot of stuff in there that's a little bit more in the business that I cut out because I just didn't think it fit. That it would have been great in another podcast, but you know, people's more specific takes on the media, for example, like there was a lot of talk about the way that this game that they made was treated in the media, and I didn't really want to get too involved in that kind of conversation, but it was pretty interesting to me to hear it, because you don't really hear from the workers on a game. Like I said, you hear from the ideas people, a producer or whatever. You don't hear from like the lady who draws the character, like, oh, this, you know, this actually sucked, or you don't get to hear that point of view. But just like I said, I wanted to make it more of like a general evergreen story and not a newsy video game industry story.
Honestly, the part of the episode that surprised me the most is them watching these Twitch streams as their game gets shut down, or devouring the news stories about their game and dunking on their game. And it feels almost, I don't think this is actually true, but almost like they're as upset with the way the game was received as what their publisher did to the studio. Again, I don't think that's true. I think that's like a mix of emotions. But it was jarring to me as someone who is in the media and who used to run like a major website of, oh yeah, you really are the worst of your peers in this field, because nobody's going to remember anything basically neutral written about your game. Maybe they remember a few positives, but if somebody really, tells you that your baby is ugly, that's going to be the thing that you will remember forever. I don't know. It made me feel just a bunch of different complicated things about the responsibility to hold my peers accountable in some way, but also to recognize that when you are talking to someone in game development, that is maybe the place that they're coming from. I found it to be very eye-opening and really sad. Like, I'm not sad for myself. I just felt horrible for them, because I do know just how brutal the discourse can get, and it can get around this game brutal.
Yeah, like everything. It's just like the tenor of conversations online, and the kind of stuff that becomes popular in the game media is whatever is like super loud and super opinionated and obnoxious. And like, it's not that you can't have an opinion about something, but it's the sort of trying to be really cool and loud about it, and as obnoxious as possible so you can cut through the murk and reach your audience. That's a strategy that a lot of people employ. And I mean, I don't want to knock anybody's hustle, but man, I feel like I'd rather do something else for a living than sit around and crap on people's work all day in like a very insubstantial way. You want to criticize someone's work, like back it up with some real heft, not just like, look at this dumb thing that's failing. There's a kind of idiocracy of the media right now that gets worse every day. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone in particular, and it's definitely not, your show.
You're very kind.
your show is not the problem, dude. Yeah. But like, I don't even consume that stuff. But when I come across it, I'm just like, God.
I want to go back to a thing that you said very early on, which is this idea of creating things that disappear and how like unsettling that is. But Ozymandias, man, it's existed for a long time. Everything turns to dust. And I'm curious for you, as somebody who is also an artist and a creator, and you've made this show, what is the difference for you between something that lasted 2 weeks and then it died after 5 years of work and you'll never see it again, and everything on oneup.com no longer being available because it's owned by its fifth owner, or something disappearing after 20 years, when Apple eventually turns off its RSS feed? Where does it feel different to you?
Yeah, I think that what feels different in the case of this game is that all of that work was in preparation for something that was supposed to be a longer lasting experience. Mm-hmm. Like when I was reviewing, Dynasty Warriors 7 on oneup.com, I was not like, I hope one day my grandchildren will be able to read about this. I don't care. But when you're making something day in and day out, and I'm not saying like reviewing a video game can't be art or whatever. It rarely is, but okay, sure, it can be. But, there's like literal artists making characters and stories and all this stuff. When you're making that stuff, you're imagining that there's going to be someone there to check it out. And I think what sucked was it was like playing a show and you show up and no one's there. And you're like, oh, I've just been like practicing with my band for 2 months. And I put flyers all over the place and there's nobody here. It sucks to like shout into nothing, which is an experience that a lot of people have in this environment. You never know what's going to happen when you throw something into the digital ocean, if anyone will notice it or not. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Everything does eventually die. You usually just have a little bit more time. And if they knew it ahead of time, I think they would have advertised it. Like, come play it. It's only going to be around for 2 weeks.
I think of somebody who makes sandcastles for a living, and they're an adult, and they know what a sandcastle is, and then they know it's going to be swept away, and they can put their heart into it, and then it disappears, versus, you know, I don't want to compare the developers here to a kid, but you build a sandcastle and it gets swept away halfway through. I guess maybe the better comparison here is last week I spoke with Claire Evans, who is the lead singer of that band Yacht, and also wrote this new game coming out, Blippo, for Panic.
Oh, I had no idea. So I know that band and I know that game, but I did not know that connection.
Yeah,
huh.
Connected, yeah.
That's cool.
And so much of that game is recreating television from the 80s and 90s, and we were talking about preservation. And she made this great point of what you want is not for the thing itself to live forever, but for it to live in someone's heart for as long as possible. I can see what is so crushing about the experience of this game is you never had the chance to insert yourself into someone's heart. That it was like they're just long enough to be there, and then nobody had that time to build that connection with your artwork. And that feels cruel in a way that is almost hard for me to comprehend. Like, it would be better for it to just never come out.
Yeah, and like, just from the gamer point of view, I don't know if we ever really all got together and thought about, hey, are you guys cool if instead of games being this thing that exists as a unchanging program on a box, like inside of a cartridge or on a disc or something, it's just going to be this like app on a website that changes all the time and will disappear one day. Video games have this problem of there's a lot of stuff called video games, and that particular kind of video game is something that I'm just like, I don't understand it. It's weird. Like, I'm not much of an online gamer to begin with, and it's weird that things just like constantly change in that world. I know I'm like old man shouting at cloud, but I just like, I liked it when the games are like, it's like a book, you know, you open it up, the page is the same every time you read it, but it's just because it's a different kind of game, you know?
Before we wrap up the section, have you heard any big updates from your subjects since you wrapped on the show?
I mean, from what I've heard, most everyone landed somewhere. It's like, that's the main thing. My friend ended up getting a job, went through a few funny interview opportunities. But yeah, that's the main thing I've heard. Since he's the one that I talk to, you know, I'll sometimes ask if he's heard from people. I'll be interested to hear what they think when the show posts, because they haven't heard it.
Awesome. Well, let's take a quick break, and then we will come back and we'll talk about your show, which is its own piece of art.
Cool.
Act 2, Behind the Scenes of a Life Well Wasted. In this half, I'll be chatting with Robert Ashley about his show, how it came to be, how it has evolved over 15 years, and where it goes from here. We are back. Tell me about the origin of A Life Well Wasted.
When I was in my 20s, I lived in the San Francisco Bay, and I worked for the Ziff Davis magazine group on Electronic Gaming Monthly, Computer Gaming World. Even before oneup.com and all that, I was writing for these magazines, and the business was changing a lot, and it had been my main gig for like 5 or 6 years. And when the magazine Electronic Gaming Monthly closed, I was pretty freaked out and not sure what I was going to do for a living, because it had been something that I wanted to do since I was probably like 10 years old, to write for a video game magazine. I was a big reader of them as a child. And at the same time, I've always been a big radio guy. Like, I listened to, This American Life, Radio Lab, the narrative radio shows, and I was interested in that. And I had all this recording gear because I was in the middle of recording and making an album with my band at the time. I had like microphones, and I was already set up and like mixing music and stuff. And so I decided that when the magazine closed and there was this party in the Mission in San Francisco, it was kind of like a wake for the magazine, that I would go down there with my little handheld Zoom recorder and talk to people and try to like make a radio show out of it as a way of like creating, I don't know, portfolio work to get a job in radio, I would say, is what I was trying to do. And yeah, so I went to the party and hung out on the rooftop in this really noisy neighborhood in San Francisco. And I knew nothing about making radio at the time. So I was using like the XY condenser microphones on the top. So it's like a stereo image and it's picking up every single person in the Mission who's coming by and being like, "Ah, fuck you," or whatever, you know, like glasses crashing and just a really, really noisy recording. But, you know, it was legible. And I spent maybe a week or two at the most. I think it was really just a week putting this thing together, the first episode of it. And I had already been appearing on some podcasts that were like roundtable podcasts about games. So there was like a sort of an audience that was used to tuning into podcasts that I was on, and I threw it at them. And so I quickly got a listener base. And at some point it turned from maybe I can get a job at NPR doing something to like, oh, maybe I can just do this and make it like a DIY project, since I'm, you know, such a 90s dude. Everything to me, I'm like, oh, maybe we can like spend a month shipping this stuff through the mail. Like, yeah, that sounds fun.
You produced 7 episodes in 2009. You've now produced an additional 6 episodes across the following 16 years. What changed your cadence?
So, like I said, when I started it, I was in the middle of recording an album with my music project. That album came out in like 2009, and it was right at that moment when Radiohead had done the like pay what you want MP3 download. And we did that as well. And we were not Radiohead, but because there was a zeitgeist for that, we ended up bringing in enough money that when my wife got a job in Athens, Georgia, which is a big music town, me and my bandmate moved there, and we spent like 2 or 3 years doing nothing but recording music, making albums and stuff. You know, it did not become a concern for a lot of people. It was I had and have an audience for music that is like way beyond what I should. I'm very grateful for it, and I got to make music like all the time for years. And it's just crazy when I think about like, man, remember when I just like play the drums for 6 hours? That's crazy. Yeah. So that kind of interrupted things. And when I got a break from that, I would like try to crank out an episode because I'd have this thing in the back of my mind. It's like, dude, I had this thing and there's like an audience, and it actually, you know, is kind of popular versus this other thing, which is less popular. But, you know, so I tried to keep it up. And then I would say, like, after I had, you know, been inactive for so long, and after podcasting became such a business, I felt like pretty low confidence about what I was doing. I was like, it's all these like professionals now, and it wasn't even that good, and I don't think I can even make these things anymore. And so it just took a long time for me to come back to it. And I was partially like dragged in by a friend of mine who works in podcasts, who was creating like a fiction show called Milky Way Galaxy. And he asked me to help him. He cast me as a character in it. And then I helped him with some edits and stuff. And it just got me like back in that mode. And that's when I finally finished the episode that came out 3 years ago, which had been kind of sitting on my hard drive for so long, and got back into it. The pause between the previous one and this one was just me trying to make this other show called Married to the Sea, which we have a pilot. I finished editing it like a year ago. So it's like held up at the moment, but I still have hopes for it. It's a documentary show that would be familiar to A Life Well Wasted listeners, but it's not about video game culture. It's really just about people who are big, huge nerds for whatever they're really into. And the pilot's about this guy in Austin, Texas named Bobby Beauchene, who grew up collecting consumer packaging. So like Coke cans and chip bags and cereal boxes. And he got into trying to become the biggest collector of McDonald's memorabilia. And we went on a road trip with him for almost a week all over the United States, visiting collectors in their basements and recording. we have this pilot and a bunch of other, people we would like to do, but it's a documentary podcast in an era of like, what people want to hear is like 4 hours of people like speculating about vaccines.
Okay, so I want to dig into this because just a moment ago you were like, I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if what I'm making is meeting the threshold. And there was a great story in Defector this past week that was like, hey, if you look at the top 100 podcasts right now, pretty much all of them are just people chatting and aimlessly chatting. There's barely any prep, it's barely edited. Do you feel like the podcast has changed in the last 5 years of what people expect from it? And then two, you've said that you refer to Life Well Wasted as radio. And I'm curious how you differentiate between like what is a modern podcast and what is radio.
Yeah, I mean, to me, being around at very close to the beginning of the podcasting thing in like 2007, 2008, I always associated the name podcast with dudes just shooting the shit, because that's really what the original shows were, like roundtable shows where you just talk to some dudes about games. And I mean, it was dudes, like almost exclusively. And, the sort of NPR style, or I mean, there are many producers of like high quality edited narrative radio outside of NPR, but that kind of thing always struck me as radio. And so when I tried to like brand my show in 2009, I was like, this is not a podcast, it's internet radio. Yeah. And I stick to that because I said it in the show, and I try to keep that format going, because when you make something so slowly over the years, the only way you can give it cohesion is to just like grab onto everything you've ever done and like try to connect to that each time. So yeah, I think radio is its own kind of art. Podcasting has obscured it, and I think probably the reason podcasting is more popular is because people, when they're listening to those shows, it's not out of like exclusive attention. Like when I'm making something, I'm designing it in the hopes that whoever's listening to it will really think about nothing else. Like you might drive down the street or go for a walk or wash your dishes or whatever, but in your head, I'm engaging you to pay attention to what's going on at all times. And I'm using sound and music and editing to try to maintain that attention. Whereas I think a lot of times in this very lonely life that we all now lead, people are putting that other stuff on to feel like they're not alone while they're, working in their house by themselves, just being disconnected. And it's kind of a pornography for friendship. Like it's like social porn. You say, I got friends, they don't know my name, but I hear them every day.
There's a little detail in the most recent episode that I love, and it's something that I think you've always done well. You create mental visuals with sound, and in this episode, you convey the number of layoffs for each year with an ascending scale, and each scale gets longer than the last to match the growing number of layoffs.
In 2021, we have 567 people got hit by layoffs. That number is going to sound cute in a second, because in 2022, it was almost 8,000. Just that jump is incredible. And then in 2023, 9,000.
It's basically a graph, but in audio form. When you are creating an episode, are you thinking visually with audio?
No, I'm very much a audio person. I mean, I listen to a ton of audiobooks. I'm just a sound obsessive person. And I'm also, because of that, I've noticed the difference between something that comes across on audio that just slides off your brain like a Teflon pan versus something that actually sticks to it. And I just know from my own experience, like I'm terrible with numbers. When people just start saying, and then there were 9,000 layoffs, and then there were 12,000 layoffs, that doesn't mean anything to me. I need something to step in and on an audio level, show me.
What makes audio only media valuable in this era that is very video heavy?
I'm trying to think of that term in exercise when you work the opposite muscle. Like we work these muscles of visual attention so hard now. When you disengage your visual mind and you really listen, that it's this whole other world of attention, and it can be a fix for some of that overheated, yanked around ADHD kind of style of consumption behavior that we all engage in. When you just like turn that screen off and you put your AirPods in or your headphones on and you go for a walk or you cook dinner or wash dishes or drive down the street, I feel like it's just this untapped potential for attention, which is at a premium these days. Like we've got the biggest companies in the world are all dying to take your attention constantly. I personally need to take a breath sometimes and turn that stuff off and be like, okay, I need to not do this and just engage in something in my mind, which I feel like audio is like the secret back door to your brain. You can get all the meaning you need from it, but it's not as flashy. So you have to come to it a little bit. Visuals like grab you, seduce you. You're in a bar or even just like a fancy restaurant, because in 2025, even a fancy restaurant has a fucking television on the wall and you're trying to talk to somebody and you keep looking over at some game that you don't even know, you don't care about, you don't follow that sport, but your brain, because it thinks like, oh, maybe there's a lion over there or something, just won't stop looking. And it's just an antidote, I think, for that kind of brain.
You said earlier that you are trying to hold on to as many things as possible from previous episodes to maintain some consistency. What are the things that you have allowed to change or have just changed naturally over the years?
Yeah. I'm always experimenting. I want the show to always have the possibility of there being something that I've never done before on it. But, it's all about the material that I collect. I might be predisposed to come up with some kind of radio show that involves tons of musical montages, for example. I obviously love that stuff. There's an energy to that I love. But this current one, there wasn't any room for that. There was way too much to hear from the people. And so the music takes more of a bookending or emphasis role instead of being like the thing that animates the story. And that's kind of different than some of the previous episodes, other than maybe the first one, because I fell into that pretty early. I'm open to changing to whatever suits the material. But when I say I latch onto the familiar, like I have this library of music that I've used for the show since the beginning, and I add to it occasionally. Every episode has some new thing that I've written for it or whatever. But I find that over the years, going back to that music library and reusing the same music from previous episodes really leaves this stamp on it. Makes it feel like all part of one thing, And then even like the way that every episode ends with the clip that I can't find room for, and then it ends with this specific music break most of the time. I'm always struggling with the feeling of like, oh, I can't do this, or it's not going to be good, or it's not going to feel like the original show because it's been too long. And so when I grab onto those things, I find like, oh yeah, that's the feeling. That's how this is supposed to be.
You'll be gaining a bunch of new listeners from this latest episode. Do you have a favorite episode you recommend they try next?
I would generally go in reverse order, because being the creator, I feel like the further back you go, the worse it is. But I know that's not true. I have to believe that because it's always getting better, right? But I would say the story that I'm most proud of is a story on the previous episode, which is episode 8, Memory. I maybe a decade ago went to GDC and I ended up meeting this guy, Brian Gibson, who's in the band Lightning Bolt. At the time, he was creating a game that he put out later on called Thumper. And I hung out with him and told him about my show. And he was like, I've got this story for you. It was the story about him and some friends when they were kids being obsessed with the King's Quest games and deciding that they wanted to make a game of their own. It's this very sweet story about like childhood friends and learning about the world of adults and how crappy it is. Kind of just taking you back to the years when you'd be like riding your bike around, being excited about stuff. It involves video games, but it's just a really nice story about childhood friends. I love that story. I heard it before I made this one and I was like, oh man, I feel good about that. So yeah, hit that one next. Reverse order, that's the key.
Last question. Will we get more episodes soon?
Soon, I'm not sure. I don't really have anything in the can right now. I mean, I was able to go from recording the material for this to releasing it in about 7 months, which sounds crazy, but to me, that's like doing it in a week or something. So, it's possible that I could get something out early next year or something. I just have to find the right material. But like I said, I am pretty focused on this other show because I'm trying to create a job for myself. And this, A Life Well Wasted, the way that I have it set up, I really like how it is. I sell posters that my friend Ollie Moss designs for it, and it has no ads. It just feels like this weird archaic thing. Nobody does it that way, and I kind of want to just keep it that way and then take my radio skills to something else where I could get sponsored by Squarespace and make some kind of disappointing episodes and not feel too bad about it or whatever. There will be new episodes, but you might have to hang out. I'm not going to give up on it. I want the A Life Well Wasted title to apply to the whole series. Like, I want it to be like, I've made one of these when I'm like 70 years old. You know, that's my vision, is I'll just keep finding something to add to the episode list. And sometimes there will be gaps that are long. That's just how it's going to be.
We will talk about actually wasting your life in the Patreon bonus. But for now, I want to give you a chance to plug anything and everything you'd like before we wrap.
I don't know that I have anything else to plug besides A Life Well Wasted.
Do you want to tell people the name of your band?
Oh, yeah.
You avoided it almost like the name of the studio.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, I mean, I was in a band called I Come to Shanghai, and it was a duo, me and this guy, Sam Frigard. I met him in Oakland, California. We made like 4 albums together. We were just like big studio rats and hung out and got to pretend to be the Beatles for like a decade. It doesn't sound like the Beatles, but it's like we had our own studio. We had all this gear. We play all the instruments. It was a great part of my life. And I still have records. Actually, if you want to buy some records, go to the I Come to Shanghai Bandcamp. The problem with records is you got to make 1,000. I Come to Shanghai is a solid like selling 500 kind of band. So I've got a section in my garage dedicated to your future vinyl purchase.
Well, listener, you're going to want to check that out because he's right. It doesn't sound like the Beatles. It sounds better than the Beatles. And you've heard it here. Put it on the back of the box. Robert, thank you so much for doing the show today.
Yeah, thanks, man. Hey, I love this show, by the way. I tune into this. I don't listen to video game podcasts, and I don't say that to be like a dick. Just I don't have a lot of time.
Not a dick to me, not my problem. You listen to this one, that's all I give a shit
but
about.
I listen to your show, and it keeps me engaged with this material to some degree, which is cool because it might make me make another one of these.
Hey,
congrats.
That is my accomplishment. That'll have been worth it. Let's take a quick break. Patreon bonus, a chat about games and perverts. This is where we split up, my friends. For Patreon subscribers, the conversation with Robert Ashley continues. We just chat about video games, which would be uneventful for most people, but my guest has been making a high-touch video game podcast for over 15 years and has not done just a traditional video game chat more or less that entire time. Find out what Robert Ashley likes to play, what he loves, what he doesn't like so much, and hear us talk about the appeal of things that are weird and uncomfortable and have rough edges. For everybody else, we still have plenty of more show with the news of the week. Act 3, the news of the week. On Thursday, Hollow Knight Silksong appeared on Steam, Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch digital stores. None of them were prepared. Despite many years of hype and a 2-week warning from developer Team Cherry, major digital storefronts accustomed to launching AAA games multiple times a month buckled under the weight of hundreds of thousands of gamers rushing to buy the same game at exactly the same moment. Errors lasted for hours. On the Switch, many gamers couldn't move the game to their virtual checkout cart. On PlayStation Store, some gamers found that the game would get stuck as wishlisted. And on Steam, my heavens, practically every link in the chain snapped. According to Down Detector, which tracks user reports of problems on various online platforms, Steam outages began around 9:30 a.m. Eastern and continued for 3 hours. Anecdotally, in that window, I couldn't get the page to load, then couldn't add the game to my cart. Once it got into my cart, I couldn't make the purchase. On social media, artistic fans reimagined the Steam's error mascot, an appendaged blob, as a boss in the game. On Twitch, channels streamed their struggles of trying to buy the game as thousands of people watched. Not a fight through Silksong's cavernous levels, but a wrestling match with a stressed game distribution server. Is any of this, really bad? I'd argue no, not really. Managing servers and audience expectations is challenging, and in the grand scheme of things, 3 hours is a blip in the lifetime of both Steam and Silksong and all the other digital storefronts. But that said, those indie developers who moved their game release dates to get away from Silksong, I think they made the right choice. Speaking of, other games did keep their release dates, serving as counter-programming to Silksong. The two most interesting to me are Hell Is Us and Chronos, both grim, adult, story-heavy action games. Hell Is Us is a Souls-like that trades the fantastical settings for something more human, if not nihilistic. At Rock Paper Shotgun, Edwin Evans Thurwell writes, quote, "Very early on in Hell Is Us, you come to a village that might as well be titled War Crimes Theme Park. The approach takes you past an exposed mass grave with mud-soaked bodies piled in the shadow of a digger's bucket." End quote. I will spare you what Edwin sees next, though I will add that developers Rogue Factor have said that the futuristic setting takes inspiration from real, modern civil wars. In an August interview with Eurogamer, the game's technical designer said, quote, "The true horrors of war are a very important narrative pillar of the game. We wanted to do it justice. It's never done gratuitously, it's never done in a grotesque way, but we want to depict human conflicts as realistically as possible." Some people might really like that. Others might prefer Chronos, the New Dawn, which comes to us from Bloober Team. They most recently created the hit remake of Silent Hill 2. While much of Bloober Team's previous work has taken inspiration from that very specific iconic domestic horror franchise, Chronos launches its horror into a sci-fi alternate reality version of 1980s Poland. You play as a mysterious figure dressed like a 19th century deep-sea diver by way of H.R. Giger. The game looks very dark. It also looks a bit more video gamey than Hell Is Us. At Games Radar, Ashley Barden writes, quote, "Chronos the New Dawn is a shameless ode to obvious inspirations like Dead Space, Resident Evil, and Silent Hill without ever feeling too much like a copy. Something I credit entirely to its sort of literary horror, where most of what distinguishes Chronos from other games can be found in scribbled notes, graffiti, and dialogue in its half-melted world." Are these games different enough from Silksong to find their audience? We'll see. And always some good news to wrap things up, and on the theme of hotly anticipated long-in-development indie games, Edmund McMillan, best known for Super Meat Boy and The Binding of Isaac, has been co-creating a game called Mugenics for a long time. But we might play it soon. According to McMillan, the big important bits of the game are handled. Both McMillan and co-creator Tyler Glale will be posting dev videos in the coming months. And at the end, maybe a release? And that is it for the news of the week. We wasted our life, and it was worth every second. Next week, back to school. What is it like to go to college for video games? And what is it like to dedicate your life to studying them? My guest is Aaron Trammell, a University of California Irvine professor who teaches game design and theory, training undergrads to make the future of games and helping master's students pen theses that push the medium forward. Aaron is also a scholar and an author. He has written 2 books on the overlap of race and play. The Privilege of Play, A History of Hobby Games, Race, and Geek Culture, and Repairing Play, A Black Phenomenology. They are both excellent, and we'll talk about them. But if you have ever wondered what a degree in games actually entails, all will be revealed, and more. But for now, I begin my farewell. Reminder time, post-game supporters, they get the show and the newsletter early on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern. They get extra acts and bonus materials. This week, Patreon listeners got an extended conversation with Robert Ashley about how he wastes and doesn't waste his life playing video games. And each month, they get a video in my ongoing series, Video Game Journalism 101, except this month, I published an audiobook version of the history of Street Fighter the movie. It's good, and don't just trust me. Listener Marcus commented, "This absolutely ruled." And Marcus knows what's up. And that audiobook, it's available right now. Plus, no ads on anything. Subscribe to the Patreon at patreon.com/postgames. Subscribe to the newsletter for free at post.games. Post Games logo by James Barham. Theme by Mark Sparling. And a special thank you to this week's guest, Robert Ashley. Like the show, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, or just share it with a friend. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week.